Good morning, Your Excellencies, colleagues and friends. I'm pleased to present the High Commissioner's talking points to represent him at this enhanced interactive dialogue on the situation of human rights of women and girls in Afghanistan. And let me start by extending a particular welcome of solidarity to the courageous Afghan women who are participating with us today, and to those joining us from Afghanistan and from around the world. It is critical to ensure that your voices remain at the center of this Council's discussion and across all other international fora. The grave scale of abuses in Afghanistan requires sustained international attention to the plight of Afghan women and real support for their cause. Our office has sought to enable this Council to hear directly a diversity of voices of Afghan women from inside and outside Afghanistan, their views, their lived experiences, the concerns they have, the difficulties they face, and their determination to face the future. This dialogue will focus on the phenomenon of an institutionalized system of discrimination, segregation, disrespect for human dignity, and the exclusion of women and girls in Afghanistan. In particular, it will address the ongoing impact of Taliban policies on women's and girls' enjoyment of fundamental freedoms and rights. This assault on women continues to affect and limit all their rights, including the right to education, the right to work, and to access effective remedies for injustice, violence, and discrimination. This enhanced dialogue builds upon the dialogue that we held a year ago with the Special Rapporteur and the Working Group on discrimination against women and girls. Since then, regrettably, the situation has worsened. Restrictions on all rights have tightened. Women are now essentially confined to their homes. Although the de facto authorities continue to claim that women's rights will be protected within the framework of Sharia law, over the past year, further and more intrusive restrictions have indeed been applied to women's and girls' lives. The cumulative effect of these various edicts has removed women and girls from public life, confining them to their homes, denying their fundamental rights and freedoms, their individual autonomy, and the most basic opportunities of life. Afghanistan remains the only country in the world, the only country, where girls are denied education beyond primary level. A few days ago, we hit the grim milestone of 1,000 days of Afghan girls being denied this fundamental enabling right. Through this ban, the Taliban continue to restrict girls' development opportunities and their ability to live independently in the future, further corroding, undermining the rich and diverse fabric of Afghan society. The Taliban also continue to apply their ban on women from working for international organizations, including the United Nations, as well as outside the home in many sectors. Its manifest illegality under international law aside, this measure significantly impacts the ability of the United Nations and other organizations to provide critical services to the population experiencing chronic poverty and humanitarian need. Just last week, the de facto authorities cut female civil servants' pay compared to male employees. The removal of women from public service further impacts their ability to be seen, to be heard, and to participate in the decision-making processes that directly affect their lives. Ongoing restrictions on movement, including the requirement of a mahram or male chaperone to travel further than a small radius from their homes, leaves them with limited and at times no ability to undertake social, cultural, or economic activities outside of their homes. Restrictions on places where they may socialize have also been imposed. Our office welcomes the report of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan, which highlights this systematic and all-encompassing set of restrictions that women and girls continue to face. It focuses on intersectional forms of repression and oppression and the realities of what Afghan women of all ages face, as well as, for example, women living with disabilities and minorities. We remain deeply concerned at this ongoing discriminatory and restrictive environment, as well as its consequences. This has had enormous impact on women and girls' mental health, for example, reflected in the shocking increase in suicides over the past year. there remains little accountability for violence against women and girls or for other violations of their rights, as the de facto justice system continues to be neither gender responsive nor accessible to women. Such systematic extreme discrimination and violence must not be normalized nor be tolerated by the international community. I hope that today's dialogue will lead to a consolidation of our agreement on the need for concerted action by this Council and the wider international community. The brave women activists present today should feel that the international community stands with them and is committed to find ways to influence the de facto authorities to reverse their regressive and repressive edicts. The future potential of Afghanistan can only be realized through upholding the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights by all women and girls. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mrs. Deputy High Commissioner, for your important statement. I then now will give the floor to our speakers as introductory for this interactive dialogue. And I now give you the floor, Mr. Bennett, for your presentation. Mr. Special Rapporteur, you have the floor.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, fellow panelists, Afghan friends, members of civil society, Eid Mubarak to Afghans and others who celebrate. I'm pleased to present my new report as requested by this Council at its 54th session. I'm also honored to be joined by 3 Afghan human rights defenders. A longer version of this statement will be posted online. My new report builds on and deepens the findings of my joint report with the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls on the Taliban's discriminatory and misogynistic policies. Following extensive research, consultation, and analysis, it finds that the Taliban's institutionalized system of gender oppression, established and enforced through its violations of women and girls' fundamental rights, is widespread and systematic, and appears to constitute an attack on the entire civilian population, amounting to crimes against humanity. This attack is intensifying. The Taliban system of discrimination, segregation, disrespect for human dignity, and exclusion is pervasive, methodical, and imposed through edicts, policies, and enforcement, sanctioning severe deprivations of fundamental rights, each systematically interacting with others, creating a mutually reinforcing architecture of oppression. Since last June, the de facto authorities have issued at least 52 edicts that intensify restrictions on Afghan women and girls, which are increasingly enforced, sometimes violently. The institutionalized deprivation causes profound gendered harm, spreading across Afghan society and cascading down through generations. Women and girls excluded from the education system faced heightened risks of forced marriage and debt bondage. Day by day, Afghanistan is being deprived of its future women engineers, journalists, biologists, politicians, and poets, to name a few. Systematic restrictions of women's right to work and freedom of movement has robbed them of their financial autonomy, forcing dependence on male relatives. Families have plunged deeper into poverty, with increased reports of depression and suicide among women and girls. Against this backdrop, I admire the ingenuity and determination of Afghan women who continue to find ways to sustain themselves and their families. Afghans with intersecting marginalized identities, including people with disabilities, LGBTIQ persons, and those from ethnic, religious, and linguistic and other minorities, faced heightened discrimination and violence. I ask the Council to consider the impact on Afghanistan's children. What will be the effect on all Afghans, but particularly on girls and boys, of the erasure of strong female role models outside of the home? What conception of the world and of themselves do girls have when they have no memories of women thriving independently from men? And what type of men do boys raised within an institutionalized regime, which has systematically disempowered women and girls, grow into? Mr. President, the violations against women and girls in Afghanistan are so severe and extensive, I have concluded that they may amount to crimes against humanity, including gender persecution. In my consultations with Afghan survivors, particularly women, they emphasize that the term gender apartheid most accurately describes their experience and are calling for its recognition as a crime against humanity. I also consider that this system of domination and oppression of women and girls should propel discussion on codification of gender apartheid as a crime against humanity and as a human rights violation, defined in a gender-inclusive way. We must ensure that all victims and survivors can access justice for the totality of crimes committed against them. The gravity and scale of the crimes can't be overstated. We have a collective responsibility to challenge and dismantle this appalling system and to hold those responsible to account. No single approach is likely to be effective on its own. What we need is an all-tools approach centered around 4 key pillars: justice and accountability, incorporating human rights and women's voices in political processes and diplomatic engagement, bolstering documentation, and reinforcing protection and solidarity for Afghan women, girls, and human rights defenders. In 12 days' time, a major meeting will take place in Doha. This offers an important opportunity to affirm that the rights and voices of women and girls will not be sidelined. I reiterate the importance of ensuring that civil society, including women, are meaningful participants in the meeting and that women's rights are central to discussions. For the credibility and sustainability of international engagement, it's vital that it is underpinned by principled human rights-centered approach. The Taliban are not recognized as a government and should not be treated as such. They must not be allowed to dictate the terms of UN-hosted meetings. Meaningful and sustained improvements in human rights must form a central part of any way forward for Afghanistan. Failure to learn the lessons of the past and sideline human rights could have devastating and long-lasting consequences. Mr. President, the Taliban's institutionalization of its system of gender oppression should shock the conscience of humanity. It's incumbent upon us all to take decisive action, to stand with Afghan women and girls, hold the perpetrators accountable, and restore dignity, equality, and justice for all. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Special Rapporteur, for your insight and highlights on the situation of Afghanistan as presented by you under your own mandate. I now give you the floor, Excellency Nasir Ahmad Andisha, Ambassador of Afghanistan and PR, for your presentation. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Shukran, Mr. President. Thank you very much. Colleagues, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome the latest report by the Special Rapporteur on the phenomena of an institutionalized system of discrimination, segregation, disrespect for human dignity, and exclusion of women and girls under the Taliban. As credible reports and eyewitness testimonies indicates, Afghanistan has fallen into a state of darkness and repression, marked by severe and systemic violation of fundamental human rights, institutionalized discrimination and exclusion, along with instances of torture, degrading, and inhumane treatment are prevailing. No doubt, Afghanistan under the Taliban rule faces one of the most serious institutionalized human rights crises in the world, particularly for women and girls, and it's increasingly worsening. Mr. President, Excellencies, let me draw your attention to something very serious. The ongoing entrenchment of Taliban gender oppression and domination, as indicated in this report, and the inherent dehumanization of women and girls is likely sowing a dangerous ideology in the new generation of Afghan, particularly young men and boys. This could potentially lead to future security risks in the region and beyond. The current impunity, which may be perceived as tolerance of the domination and abuse of women and girls, is creating risks that are not being fully recognized, acknowledged, or addressed. Mr. President, as member of the United Nations, Afghanistan has obligation under the UN Charter, international treaties and resolutions, including but not limited to CEDAW, the ILO Convention, the Security Council Resolution 1325. These treaties and resolutions mandates elimination of discrimination against women, promote gender equality in the workplace, and ensure women participation in peace and security processes. However, the Taliban rhetoric and action starkly contravene this obligation, demonstrating institutionalized discrimination and inclusion of women and girls. Approximately 52 edicts issued between June 2023 and March 2024 shows that the further restriction for women and girls across the country. Mr. President, the UN Charter unequivocally reaffirms the equal rights of men and women. Article 4 emphasizes that peace-loving states accepting the obligation contained in the present charter are able and willing to carry them out will get a seat around the table. In the past 3 years, Taliban government has proven that it is neither willing nor able or capable of carrying these basic UN Charter obligations. Therefore, the people of Afghanistan appeals to this Council member to uphold the core values of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, recognizing Afghanistan's role as one of its original signatories. They call for a steadfast commitment on the principle of universality, indivisibility, and interrelatedness of UDHR in all discussions and decisions related to Afghanistan. The UN should prioritize the protection of fundamental human rights under the Taliban rule. They emphasize, the people of Afghanistan, that women's basic rights should be recognized as essential and non-negotiable, rather than a means to serve other interests and ends. The protection and the empowerment of women are paramount for ensuring just and equitable Afghanistan, for Afghanistan of future and Afghanistan after Taliban. These reports highlight that the UN member states have heightened obligation to address severe breaches of fundamental human rights in the current context. They must avoid normalizing or legitimizing the Taliban under any guise, including during the upcoming Doha meeting on the 28th of June this month. Mr. President, impunity must not find refuge anywhere, not in Afghanistan, not in Palestine, not in Ukraine or elsewhere. This Council should heed to calls for more robust accountability mechanism to ensure justice is served. Mr. President, this report once again shows that the worsening of unprecedented situation of human rights in Afghanistan demands full accountability. Special procedures, mandate holders, and the treaty bodies are urged to monitor and coordinate efforts closely. States engaged with the Taliban must demand human rights respect and include women in their dialogues. Finally, Mr. President, I emphasize that the gender apartheid should be recognized as a crime against humanity, and we call for an independent investigative mechanism by this Council that reflects the gravity of the situation in Afghanistan. And I thank you very much, Mr. President.
After abandoning schools and universities, I could not continue my education, but I tried to learn new skills. I faced so many challenges, not only me, but also my other women in my country. They cannot study, so they will not have a job. Even I couldn't graduate from school because the ban came. And because of that, I lost many opportunities in my life. I want to be an effective person, a successful person. Afghan girls are like those birds that with broken wings, they are still trying to fly. And they still want to find an opportunity and fly as high as they can. And nowadays that I am at home with no activity, with no communicating with people, I face to depression and I'm really helpless and I am losing my hope. We all Afghan girls, we all lose our freedom, and we are not like the past. We cannot do activities that we did in the past. And all these things changed in our life. At the past, girls could travel alone without anyone. They were free, but now we are not free. We are like slaves. We should always have a man with ourselves. And without mahram, we are not allowed to travel anywhere. I don't feel safe because if I don't obey those rules, I'm really afraid that what will happen to me. I'm really worried about my future. Do they capture me? Do they kill me? Or what? I really feel sad and I say that why these things happen to us, only to Afghan girls. Nobody is facing these challenges that everyday girls face. But despite of all restrictions, I still try to deal with problems and survive from this situation. So no power, no injustice is forever. I always try to keep my friends and my family, especially my sisters, hopeful. I didn't give up, and I will not, and I will never give up, and I will never let them to give up. Nowadays, I have very simple activities. I'm helping with my mom in cooking. I learned to cook new foods and these things, but it is not my future. I want to have a bright future. I want to become a leader. I want to become voice of the all Afghan girls, and I want help with Afghan girls. I want to be successful, and I want to make my parents proud. My community before was supportive to the normal activities the girls do. After changing the regime, their minds are and the way of their thinking also changed. I mean, the girls. At the past, they thought that they should be successful, they should be a leader, they should make their parents proud. But now they cannot. You know, a few months ago, they captured girls and they badly hated them, and they I don't know what other bad actions what done by them. Those girls that they didn't wear proper hijab, I'm sure that it's an excuse because girls really afraid. They always try to wear black, uh, scarf, black coat, everything. And 3 or 4 of those girls or ladies, when they come back, they did suicide. And when a person wants to do suicide, when there is a no hope in human beings' life, at the time they choose this option to do suicide. Most of my friends nowadays they got married, they become mother, and they have a baby. And so most of the ladies have lost their hopes of studying, and they choose to do early marriage. If I get married soon, at that time, I'm sure that in the future I will be a weak mother, and my children will not proud of me. My children will be the same of me, weak, hopeless, and they cannot deal with problems. Despite of all challenges, my parents are great supporters in my life. I really want to become a leader, and I want to be the voice of all Afghan girls and all over the world. And I wish I could help them and motivate them. The young girls of Afghanistan are what keeps me hopeful. Some of them are like me. They try to deal with problems, and they don't want to give up, and they want to have, still want to have hope, and they don't want to give up. And these things are what keeps me hopeful. I appeal international community. Actually, I beg them to keep supporting the girls and women of Afghanistan, especially in education and work. I hope we could go back to school and be able to get jobs. Always remember, on the road to success, there always we. I mean we, not only all women in Afghanistan, but the whole Afghanistan and international community. And I'm so grateful to international community to support Afghan girls in this situation. And I wish that they could support us more and more.
Thank you so much. Thanks to Mr. Richard Bennett and his vulnerable team for creating this valuable report. So today I am here to speak with you regarding the women and girls from my homeland, regarding the people who always have experienced of the gender discrimination and gender persecution in their life. Yes, Their Excellencies, I know the texture of traditional and patriarchate of our society, but within past 20 years, leading up 2021, at least we had some support of international society, and we had our local constitution. Based on 2004 Afghanistan constitution and based on the Convention of the CEDAW and Convention of the Rights of People with Disability, at least we could pursue to our education rights. We had the chance to pursue to some of our rights. We could walk without the fear of getting detected or going to detention center or being tortured within the then government. But unfortunately, after Taliban's second takeover, Afghanistan got like a dark place and a vast prison for all Afghanistan people, specifically women and girls. Yes, we women and girls are experiencing like systematic gender apartheid within these 3 years. We are suffering from this gender apartheid. And you imagine being a woman, being a girl, being with disability, living in a rural area, and having other problems as well. I'm trying to draw your attention to a woman life who I named her Amina. Amina has 5 daughters. One of them has physical impairment, and then she had her own job, but nowadays she doesn't have any job. She's at home, and the thing that she is worried about it, she told me that she wanted to at least have one day without worry regarding her daughters, not to be obliged to go to forced marriage just because of their poverty and because of their disability. Ladies and gentlemen, I just must to acknowledge, based on the high technology and based on the lots of immigration which is happening, the extremism and the radicalism which is happening in Afghanistan, not staying inside Afghanistan borders, and it will affect far and wide different countries, regional and unfortunately other international or all international communities. I'm going to say we all Afghan citizens who we are inside the country or we are waiting in a bridging countries for our last destiny, and even the people who are in the third country and we are living in exile, we all of us victim of radicalism, victim of gender apartheid, victim of problems, challenges with the ruling system made for us. But still, we have the power. We have the power to make the de facto government responsive one, not only for Afghanistan nation, but for all international society. So let's join hands together to make Afghanistan a better place for all women and girls and for all nations. For this, we request, 1, no retreat from international accepted human rights law and regulars while engaging with the Taliban. Dear presidents, we, women and girls from Afghanistan, we ask you to please, while the international society wanted to engage with the Taliban, do not have any setback. We do not want to see any setback from the accepted human rights rule and regulars. We need our own rights based on the international documents, based on the international regulars and laws. Afghan women and those who are more marginalized, like people with disability, all Afghanistan citizens, they want to see, they want to be represented within all peace process or all peace process building or making any strategic plan for the future of Afghanistan. We all need to be heard. Afghan women, sound need to be heard, and we all need to be there. We all need to be heard from international society, and the Taliban need to know that that land, Afghanistan, is not just for them. We all Afghanistan people need to be there. Our voice need to be there. And the third recommendation from our side is that while your international society sending humanitarian assistance there as a response to this crisis, so having a contribution or an engagement with vulnerable people, including people with disability, and women should be a precondition from the donors. So let's join hands together again to make all world a much better place for all women and girls, including my land, Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be here. I would like you all to close your eyes for a minute and imagine a world where one day when you wake up, your children do not have the right to attend school, particularly your daughters. Your rights to freedom of speech and expression is taken from you. Your rights to have a job are denied. And even for a penny, you rely on someone else. You cannot have any say in how the government or policies should be. Most importantly, you cannot even complain about any of these injustices because you were even deprived of having access to justice system. So you basically become a nobody. I know it seems impossible to imagine such a world, but it is a harsh reality for Afghan women every single day. When the Taliban took over Afghanistan in 2021, I was faced with a hard choice. Either leave my country or stay and become nobody, not a poet, not a writer, and most importantly, not an activist. This wasn't just my fate, it became the fate of millions of Afghan women. Under the Taliban's rule, women in Afghanistan have become faceless, voiceless, and nameless creatures. In the past 3 years, the Taliban have systematically institutionalized policies that have stripped us of our identities and dignities, turning us into nobody. As Afghan women, we are forbidden from being students, teachers, doctors, pilots, journalists, judges, politicians, and so many more things because in the eyes of the Taliban, we are nobody. Asma was a student and was just 12 years old. She should be in grade 7, attending school and dreaming of a bright future, but she is not. Instead, her brilliant young mind is constantly occupied with a haunting question: will she ever be somebody? 2 years ago, her cousin, Dunya, was banned from school. Asma's sister, Laila, who could have been in third year of her university, is now confined to the four walls of her house. Asma's mother, Farida, was in grade 6 when the civil war broke in Afghanistan. Her school was shut down, and she never set foot in a classroom again. Apart from being Asma's and Laila's mother, she's nobody. This is not only the story of Asma and her family, it is the bitter reality of millions of Afghan mothers and daughters. It didn't stop with Farida, and it is not going to stop with Asma. It will impact several generations to come. A young woman who teaches girls secretly told me she lives in daily fear. What if the Taliban find out about her school and arrest her? She asks, and I quote, "Is getting an education a crime?" Another woman who could have graduated this year from university asks, and I quote, "Who will give me back the time that I lost?" A widow who used to work in a factory and now she is fired because she is a woman asks, and I quote, "Who is going to feed my children?" From being students, teachers, workers, and breadwinners, they have all become nobody. We have even become nobody in our own homes, with thousands of us forced into marriage and many more enduring rising domestic violence. The Taliban systematically created a system that will push our society into ignorance, poverty, and extremism. The Taliban may have claimed that their restrictions on women are in alliance with Islam and Afghan culture, but we see no such policies in any other Islamic country. Their policies do not reflect our religion and cultural values. As you can look at the data where millions of women were studying and working before the collapse of the Republic. Despite all this segregation and discrimination, Afghan women and men seized every tiny opportunity to resist gender apartheid in Afghanistan, whether by speaking anonymously to international media or secretly documenting human rights violations, writing poetry, or taking bold actions, such as the resignation of over 50 university professors, the refusal to take exam by university students in Nangarhar, or the protests of young girls and women who bravely took to the streets in Paktia, Herat, Badakhshan, Kabul, and other parts of the country. In recent days, we launched a campaign named Iqra, a verse in Quran, which means read. The campaign has been met with nationwide solidarity. Hundreds of men and women raised their voices for the reopening of girls' schools. Despite being threatened, beaten up, imprisoned, and forced into exile, we still fight on. But now, as Afghan women, we ask you, with all your power and influence, what have you done in the past 3 years? We are fighting for our existence, and in this fight we feel so alone, betrayed, and abandoned that sometimes it becomes nearly impossible to hold on to hope or dream. All we ask is for you to listen to us, hear us, let us tell our story, and decide what is best for our country and us. Consult us, include us in every decision about Afghanistan, because we're not nobody, we are somebody, and as somebody, we have the right to change our fate and live with dignity, not only on national level, but as global citizens. And remember, any decision or deal will fail without the meaningful contribution of Afghan women and youth. We continue to resist for our rights, and we ask you to stand with us and be on the right side of history. Thank you.
Madam Vice President, Madam Deputy High Commissioner, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to address the 56th session of the Human Rights Council. I am honored to be among you today, but my attendance is marked by a deep sense of humility. I want to acknowledge that my experience is nowhere near to what my sisters in Afghanistan are enduring at this current moment. And in no way do I aim to fill their shoes. Instead, I sit before you as someone who grew up under the Taliban's first regime, and as an Afghan woman now working at a Washington, D.C.-based NGO supporting a network of exiled Afghan women leaders. Without the education I received after the first regime's collapse in 2001, I would not be speaking to you today. I am greatly saddened to see the past echoing in the present, with the Taliban's restrictive policies of my early childhood, again stripping the rights of millions of Afghans under a regime that has not changed for the better, but instead has adopted draconian measures to oppress Afghan women and girls. Building on the profound insights of Afghan women who just spoke and Special Rapporteur Bennett's recent report, I wish to draw your attention to avenues for accountability regarding Afghanistan that stand before you, ripe with opportunity for action. These tools are not new. Indeed, they represent the very principles on which the UN was founded on, but they're presently underutilized. First, the International Criminal Court. On March 5, 2020, an official investigation into Afghanistan was opened. 4 years on, the investigation is ongoing, and no charges have been filed. As the investigation continues, the ICC should ensure Afghan women and minorities, Hazaras, Tajiks, Hindus, Sikhs, Uzbeks, and other marginalized groups are included in evidence collection. Similarly, countries should remove barriers to interviewing witnesses and survivors within their territories, including visa and travel restrictions. Second, the International Court of Justice. By ratifying CEDA in 2003, Afghanistan consented to the ICJ's jurisdiction to adjudicate disputes. As the prior testimonies and latest reports illuminate, the Taliban is violating the convention. Any party to CEDA can challenge de facto's alleged violations on the ICJ. And I encourage your countries to engage in this litigation by opening or joining cases, and should a ruling be reached, to implement the judgments. Third, recognizing and codifying gender apartheid as a crime under international law. Existing legal frameworks do not sufficiently capture the crimes perpetrated against women and girls in Afghanistan. Gender apartheid denotes an institutionalized system of inhuman acts committed for the purpose of establishing domination of one group over another. Women around the world and 10 member states have expressed openness to exploring the codification of gender apartheid, and I encourage you to refer action on gender apartheid to your capitals. These transnational accountability pathways hold real potential, but are often hindered by the political challenges of international collaboration and coordination. Accordingly, countries can elect to unilaterally continue to withhold formal recognition of the de facto regime and support sanctions to restrict their leaders' travel. Recognition and engagement are distinct. Engagement necessary to deliver essential aid should continue, but relations with a de facto regime should not be normalized. Countries should also stand firm on the conditions for dialogue at the upcoming Doha meeting. It is essential that the international community insists that Afghan members of civil society, minorities, and women, and those at the intersectionality of these different identities are represented in these talks. These experiences are currently missing from the conversation. How can you have a meaningful dialogue about the future of the country with the majority of the population unrepresented? Further, talks of security and human rights should not be divided, as they are inextricably linked. Without human rights protections for all, security cannot be sustainably achieved. Participation, prevention, protection, and recovery and relief are essential components of women, peace, and security. Without participation, how can you reasonably expect prevention and protection for women from the perpetrated harm? You cannot. Our world faces unprecedented challenges. More than ever, we need leadership grounded in shared values of empathy and human dignity. It is hard to show this type of leadership. It is hard to take focused action amid a sea of ever-changing challenges. But it is harder to be a woman in Afghanistan. This is a critical moment to take action, and the tools are available. Use them. Thank you.